It was January 1st, 2026 at 2:47 a.m. when a crushing weight of spiritual burden, something I cannot fully explain even now, drove me to a forest clearing I'd discovered years ago in the mountains outside Los Angeles. And there, surrounded by ancient oak trees whose gnarled branches stretched toward heaven like arthritic fingers pleading for mercy, their bark weathered by centuries of storms, their roots breaking through the frost-covered earth like veins of some sleeping giant, Jesus appeared before me with tears streaming down his face, and spoke words that shattered everything I thought I understood about death, eternity, and the five deadly anchors that keep seniors chained to this earth, even as their bodies prepare to meet him. Not everyone who sees this message is meant to see it. Some will scroll past, some will ignore it. But you've been marked. You've been marked because you clicked on this video at this exact moment in history. That wasn't an accident. That wasn't the algorithm. That was divine appointment. Before I go any further, I need you to do something. Drop your prayer requests in the comments right now. I don't care if you think it's too personal. I don't care if you think no one will see it. Jesus sees it. And I'm telling you, after what he showed me in that forest clearing, after what he revealed about the 5 things seniors must release before death, I will pray over every single request. But here's what I need from you. If you're a true believer, if you're someone who doesn't just play church but actually wants to hear what Jesus is desperately trying to tell his people in these final moments of history, you need to subscribe to this channel right now. Click that button, ring the bell. Because YouTube doesn't want you to see this content. The enemy doesn't want you to see this content. And honestly, even some Christians won't want you to see this content because what Jesus showed me goes against everything the comfortable, lukewarm church has been teaching about aging gracefully and dying peacefully. Now, some of you know me as Jonathan Roumie, the actor who portrays Jesus in The Chosen. That show has reached hundreds of millions of people across the globe. I've spent years studying the Gospels, immersing myself in who Jesus was and is, praying before every scene, fasting, seeking his face. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what happened in that forest clearing over 3 consecutive nights starting on New Year's Day 2026. Let me take you back to that first night. The temperature had dropped to 28 degrees. I could see my breath forming clouds in the air, illuminated by the full moon that hung above the clearing like a silver coin suspended in black velvet. I hadn't planned to be there. I'd been in my apartment, unable to sleep, feeling this inexplicable urgency, this spiritual restlessness that felt like a hand gripping my chest. I got in my car and drove. I didn't know where I was going until I arrived. The forest was silent in that particular way that only winter forests can be, not the absence of sound, but the presence of a deeper quiet, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. My boots crunched through the frost-covered leaves as I made my way along the trail I'd walked a dozen times before. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, catching the white bark of sycamore trees that stood like sentinels along the path. When I reached the clearing, I turned off my flashlight. The moonlight was enough. It poured down through the canopy of ancient oaks, creating pools of silver light on the forest floor. The clearing was roughly 40 feet in diameter, ringed by trees that had to be 3, maybe 400 years old. Their trunks were massive, so wide that 3 men couldn't wrap their arms around them. Their branches interlocked overhead, creating a natural cathedral. I stood in the center of that clearing, and I began to pray. I don't remember exactly what I said. I remember the desperation in my voice. I remember asking God why he'd placed this burden on my heart, why I couldn't sleep, why I felt like I was supposed to be there at nearly 3 in the morning in a freezing forest clearing, and then the temperature changed. I know how that sounds. I know skeptics will say it was just a warm front moving through, or my imagination, or a dozen other explanations. But I'm telling you, in the span of maybe 5 seconds, the air went from biting cold to pleasantly warm, like stepping from winter into spring. The frost on the leaves around me began to glisten with moisture as it melted. That's when I saw him. He didn't appear in a flash of light. He didn't descend from the clouds. One moment I was alone in the clearing, and the next moment he was standing 15 feet in front of me, as real and solid as the trees surrounding us. He was wearing simple robes, not the pristine white you see in paintings, but earth-toned, practical garments. His feet were bare despite the ground that had been frozen moments before, but it was his face that undid me. He was weeping. Not gentle tears, not the single photogenic tear you see in religious art. His face was contorted with grief, his shoulders shaking, tears streaming down his cheeks and into his beard. The moonlight caught those tears, making them shine like diamonds falling to the earth. I dropped to my knees. I couldn't help it. My legs simply gave out. Lord? My voice came out as a whisper, barely audible even to myself. He looked at me, and his eyes, I can't describe them adequately. They held such love and such sorrow simultaneously that I felt my own tears begin to flow. "Jonathan," he said, and his voice was like nothing I'd ever heard. It resonated not just in my ears, but in my chest, in my bones, in the very core of my being. "Do you know why I'm weeping?" I shook my head, unable to speak. "I'm weeping for my children who are about to step into eternity, still clutching the very things that will keep them from experiencing the fullness of what I've prepared for them. I'm weeping for the seniors, my beloved ones who have walked with me for decades, who are approaching death's door with their hands full of poison they think is treasure." He moved closer, and I could feel the warmth radiating from him, pushing back the cold of the night. A wind began to move through the clearing, gentle at first, rustling the leaves that still clung to the oak branches. "There are 5 things," he continued, his voice breaking with emotion. "5 deadly anchors that I have been warning my people to release, and they will not listen. They will not let go. And when they cross from this life into the next, these anchors will determine not their salvation, that is secure in me, but the fullness of joy, the depth of intimacy, the heights of glory they will experience in my presence." I found my voice. "What are they, Lord? What are these 5 things?" He raised his hand, and suddenly the clearing was filled with light, not from the moon, but from him. The ancient oaks seemed to lean in, as if they too were listening. An owl that had been silent in the branches above suddenly called out, its voice echoing through the forest. "The first," Jesus said, "is unforgiveness." As he spoke the word, the air in the clearing seemed to shimmer, and I saw a vision overlaid on the physical reality around me. I saw an elderly woman, she had to be in her 80s, sitting in a nursing home room. Her face was deeply lined, her hands spotted with age, her body frail. But her eyes were hard, filled with decades of bitterness. Her sister betrayed her in 1973, Jesus said softly, and somehow I knew he was speaking truth, that this was a real person, not a hypothetical. Over a family inheritance, it wasn't even a large amount of money, $12,000. She has held on to that betrayal for 53 years. She has nursed it, fed it, allowed it to grow like a cancer in her soul. She prays, she reads her Bible, she goes to church when her health allows, but she will not forgive. The vision shifted. I saw the same woman, but now she was in a hospital bed, her breathing labored, her family gathered around her. I could see, somehow I could see, the moment her spirit left her body. And then I saw her standing before Jesus, and the look on her face was one of horror as she realized she was still carrying that unforgiveness like a chain wrapped around her chest. "She is mine," Jesus said firmly. "Her salvation is not in question. But Jonathan, the weight of that unforgiveness, the decades of bitterness, it has shaped her soul. It has hardened parts of her heart. And when she stands before me, when she enters into eternity, she will experience my love, yes, but she will not experience the fullness of intimacy she could have known. There will be a distance, a barrier of her own making that will take ages to dissolve." The vision faded, and I was back in the clearing, staring at Jesus through my tears. "But Lord," I said, my voice shaking, "we've been taught that once we're in heaven, everything is perfect, that all pain and sorrow are wiped away." "And they are," he interrupted gently. "But you have misunderstood what that means. The capacity for joy, for intimacy, for experiencing the depths of my love, these things are shaped by how you live, by what you choose to hold on to or release. A cup that is filled with bitterness has less room for joy. A heart that is hardened around unforgiveness cannot expand as fully into love." He stepped even closer, and now he was only a few feet away. I could see the tear tracks on his face, could see the infinite compassion in his eyes. "I am warning my seniors, those who are in their final years, their final months, their final days. You must let go of unforgiveness before you die, not for my sake, not to earn your salvation, but for your sake, so that you can enter into the fullness of what I have prepared for you." The wind in the clearing picked up, and the branches of the ancient oaks began to sway. The sound was like a chorus of whispers, like the trees themselves were agreeing with his words. "How many are carrying this?" I asked. "How many seniors are holding on to unforgiveness?" His face crumpled with fresh grief. "Millions, millions of my beloved children, approaching the end of their earthly journey, still clutching grudges from decades ago. Unforgiveness toward spouses who betrayed them, unforgiveness toward children who disappointed them, unforgiveness toward friends who abandoned them, unforgiveness toward churches that hurt them, unforgiveness toward me for prayers they believe I didn't answer. That last one hit me like a physical blow. Unforgiveness toward you? Yes, he whispered. They don't call it that. They call it struggling with faith or having questions or being honest with God. But underneath, there is unforgiveness, anger at me for allowing their spouse to die, bitterness toward me for allowing their child to walk away from faith, resentment toward me for a life that didn't turn out the way they planned. He reached out and placed his hand on my shoulder, and the warmth of his touch flooded through my entire body. Jonathan, I need you to tell them. I need you to warn them. Time is short. For many who are watching this, time is very short. They must release unforgiveness before they die. They must let it go. Not through their own strength, they cannot do it alone, but by crying out to me, by asking me to help them forgive, by making the choice daily, hourly if necessary, to release the person who hurt them into my hands. I was sobbing now, the weight of what he was saying crushing down on me. Around us, the forest seemed to be responding to the intensity of the moment. The wind grew stronger, and I could hear the creaking of branches, the rustling of leaves. The moonlight seemed to pulse, growing brighter and then dimmer, as if the heavens themselves were breathing. There's a man, Jesus said, and another vision appeared before me. He's 76 years old. He was abused by his father as a child, beaten, humiliated, told he was worthless. He has spent his entire adult life trying to prove his father wrong, trying to earn worth through achievement. He became successful, wealthy, respected, but he never forgave his father. His father died 20 years ago, and he thought that would be the end of it, but the unforgiveness remained, like a hook in his soul. I watched as the vision showed me this man's life, the driven ambition, the broken relationships, the inability to receive love because he'd never released the hatred toward his father. He has 6 months left, Jesus said quietly, 6 months before cancer takes his body, and he still hasn't forgiven. He thinks it doesn't matter anymore because his father is long dead. But Jonathan, unforgiveness doesn't require the presence of the person who hurt you. It's a chain you carry in your own heart. And if he doesn't release it before he dies, he will carry that chain into eternity, and it will take so much longer to be free of it there. The vision faded, and Jesus removed his hand from my shoulder. He took a step back, and the light that had been emanating from him began to dim slightly, though his presence was no less powerful. This is the first of the 5 things I'm warning seniors to release, he said. Tomorrow night, I will show you the second. But tonight, I need you to understand the urgency of this message. I need you to understand that this isn't about earning salvation. That is a gift, freely given, secured by my blood. This is about entering into the fullness of joy, the depths of intimacy, the heights of glory that I have prepared for those who love me. He looked up at the canopy of ancient oaks above us, and I followed his gaze. Through the interlocking branches, I could see stars beginning to appear as clouds moved away from the moon. These trees, he said, have stood here for centuries. They have weathered storms, droughts, fires. They have released their leaves every autumn, trusting that new growth will come in spring. They don't cling to what must fall away. My children must learn this wisdom. They must learn to release what I'm asking them to release, trusting that what I have for them is infinitely better than what they're holding on to. I wanted to ask him more questions. I wanted to know about the other 4 things. I wanted to understand exactly how to help people release unforgiveness. But even as I opened my mouth to speak, he began to fade, not disappearing suddenly, but gradually becoming translucent, like morning mist burning away in sunlight. Tomorrow night, he said, his voice growing distant. Return here tomorrow night at the same time. I have more to show you, more to tell you. The message must go out. Time is short. And then he was gone. The warmth left with him. The temperature dropped back to its winter cold in seconds. The wind died down. The forest returned to its deep silence. I was alone in the clearing, on my knees, my face wet with tears, my body shaking, not from cold, but from the weight of what I'd just experienced. I don't know how long I stayed there. Eventually, I got to my feet. My legs were stiff from kneeling on the frozen ground. I turned on my flashlight and made my way back down the trail to my car, but I was moving on autopilot. My mind was reeling, trying to process what had just happened. When I got home, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I sat at my kitchen table as dawn broke outside my window, and I knew I knew with absolute certainty that I had to share this message. I knew that some people would think I was crazy. I knew that some would accuse me of making it up for attention or views or money. I knew that even some Christians would be skeptical or critical. But I also knew that somewhere out there, someone watching this video is carrying unforgiveness that they need to release before they die. Maybe it's you. Maybe you're a senior and you've been holding on to bitterness towards someone for years, for decades. Maybe you've justified it. Maybe you've told yourself that what they did was unforgivable, that they don't deserve forgiveness, that you have a right to your anger. And maybe all of that is true. Maybe what they did was truly terrible. Maybe they don't deserve forgiveness. Maybe you do have a right to your anger. But Jesus is asking you to release it anyway, not for their sake, for yours, because you're running out of time and he doesn't want you to carry that chain into eternity. Listen to me. If you're watching this and you're struggling with unforgiveness, I want you to do something right now. I want you to pause this video and I want you to pray. You don't have to feel ready. You don't have to feel like you can do it. Just tell Jesus that you're willing to be made willing. Tell him that you want to forgive, even if you don't know how. Ask him to help you release the person who hurt you into his hands. And then I want you to come back tomorrow night because I'm going to share what Jesus showed me on the second night. The second thing he's warning seniors to release before death, and I'm telling you, it's going to challenge everything you think you know about faith and eternity. But before you go, before you click away, I need to know you're serious about this. I need to know you're not just a casual viewer who stumbled across this video. Drop a comment right now. Tell me if you're struggling with unforgiveness. Tell me who you need to forgive. You don't have to share details if it's too personal, but I need to know you're engaging with this message, because Jesus didn't show me these things just so I could create content. He showed me these things because lives, eternal experiences, hang in the balance. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Ring the bell. Share this video with every senior you know, every person who's approaching the end of their earthly journey. Time is short. The message is urgent. And not everyone who needs to hear this will get the chance. You've been marked. You've been chosen to receive this warning. What you do with it will echo into eternity. Tomorrow night, same time, I'll share what happened when I returned to that forest clearing. The second thing Jesus warned seniors must let go of before death. Trust me, you don't want to miss it. I returned to the forest clearing at 2:47 a.m. on January 2nd, 2026, exactly 24 hours after that first encounter. And this time I knew what I was walking into, or at least I thought I did. The temperature was even colder than the night before, hovering around 23 degrees, and a thin layer of fog had settled into the valley below, creeping up through the trees like ghostly fingers reaching for something they could never quite grasp. The moon was still nearly full, but tonight clouds kept passing across its face, creating a rhythm of light and shadow that made the forest feel alive, breathing, watching. My hands were shaking as I walked the trail, and it wasn't from the cold. I'd spent the entire day in a state of spiritual vertigo, unable to focus on anything except what Jesus had shown me about unforgiveness. I'd received hundreds of comments on the video I'd posted, some from people weeping as they confessed decades of bitterness, others from skeptics calling me a fraud, still others from people who were angry that I would dare suggest their unforgiveness was a problem. That last group troubled me the most because I could hear the chains rattling in their words. The forest was different tonight. I could feel it the moment I stepped onto the trail. The silence was deeper, more expectant. An owl called from somewhere in the darkness, 3 sharp hoots that echoed through the trees. The beam of my flashlight caught the eyes of a deer standing just off the path, watching me with an intensity that felt almost human before it bounded away into the underbrush. When I reached the clearing, I didn't turn off my flashlight immediately. I stood at the edge looking at the ring of ancient oaks, their massive trunks dark against the fog-diffused moonlight. The clearing looked exactly as it had the night before, but it felt different, charged, sacred, dangerous in the way that truly holy things are always dangerous. I stepped into the center and turned off my flashlight. For a long moment, nothing happened. The cold bit through my jacket, and I could feel the frost-hardened earth through the soles of my boots. My breath formed clouds in the air, and I watched them dissipate into the darkness. I began to wonder if I'd misunderstood, if Jesus had meant some other night, if perhaps the first encounter had been a one-time event. Then the wind came. It started as a whisper through the highest branches, but within seconds it had grown into a roar that shook the entire forest. The ancient oaks swayed and creaked, their branches groaning like the masts of ships in a storm. Leaves that had somehow clung to the branches through winter were torn free and sent spiraling through the air. The fog that had been creeping up from the valley was suddenly whipped into frenzied motion, creating shapes and shadows that appeared and disappeared in the moonlight. And in the center of that wind, in the eye of that storm, Jesus appeared. This time he didn't fade in gradually. One moment the clearing was empty except for me and the wind, and the next moment he was standing there, his robes whipping around him, his hair blown back from his face. But unlike everything else in the clearing, he was perfectly still, unmoved by the chaos surrounding him. His eyes locked onto mine, and I fell to my knees again. I couldn't help it. The weight of his presence was even more intense than it had been the night before. "Jonathan," he said, and his voice cut through the wind as if the storm didn't exist. "Did you deliver my message about unforgiveness?" "Yes, Lord," I managed to say, my voice barely audible even to myself. "I posted the video. Thousands have seen it. Many are responding, confessing, asking for help to forgive." "And many are angry," he interrupted, but there was no condemnation in his voice, only deep sadness. "Many are defending their right to hold on to bitterness. Many are explaining why their situation is different, why their hurt is too deep, why the person who wounded them doesn't deserve forgiveness." He moved closer, and the wind seemed to move with him, swirling around us both. The temperature began to rise, just as it had the night before, and I watched as the frost on the ground around his feet melted, creating small pools of water that reflected the moonlight. "They don't understand," he continued, "that unforgiveness is a prison they've built for themselves. They think they're punishing the person who hurt them, but they're only punishing themselves. They're only limiting their own capacity for joy, for peace, for intimacy with me." He knelt down in front of me, bringing his face level with mine. His eyes were red-rimmed, and I realized he'd been weeping again. Perhaps he'd never stopped. "Tonight," he said softly, "I need to show you the second thing. The second anchor that my seniors must release before they die. And this one, Jonathan, this one is even harder for them to hear, even harder for them to accept." I nodded, unable to speak, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Jesus stood and raised his hand, and the wind suddenly stopped. The forest fell into absolute silence. No rustling leaves, no creaking branches, not even the distant sound of traffic from the highway miles away. It was as if the entire world was holding its breath. "The second thing," he said, his voice echoing in that supernatural silence, "is the idol of family." I blinked, confused. "Lord, I don't understand. You commanded us to honor our fathers and mothers. You spoke about the importance of family. How can family be an idol?" His expression was infinitely patient, infinitely sad. "I didn't say family is an idol. I said the idol of family. There is a difference, and my people, especially my seniors, have forgotten that difference." He gestured, and another vision began to form in the clearing. This time, instead of appearing like a projection, it was as if the air itself became a window into another place, another time. I could see an elderly man, he looked to be in his early 70s, sitting in a living room surrounded by photographs. Pictures of children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren covered every surface. The walls were lined with them. The man was staring at his phone, his face twisted with hurt and anger. "His name is Robert," Jesus said quietly. "He's 73 years old. He has 4 children, 12 grandchildren, and 3 great-grandchildren, and he is dying inside because they don't visit him as often as he thinks they should. They don't call as often as he wants. They don't prioritize him the way he believes he deserves after everything he did for them." I watched as the vision showed me Robert's life, a good man, a faithful man, someone who had worked hard to provide for his family, who had sacrificed and given and loved. But somewhere along the way, his love for his family had twisted into something else, into expectation, into demand, into an idol. "He prays every day," Jesus continued, "but half of his prayers are complaints about his children. He reads his Bible, but he interprets every passage about honoring parents as ammunition for his resentment. He goes to church, but he spends the fellowship time talking about how ungrateful his family is. His entire identity, his entire sense of worth, his entire emotional stability is tied to how much attention his family gives him." The vision shifted, and I saw Robert in a hospital bed, his breathing labored, his time clearly short. His children were there, gathered around him, but even in his final moments, I could see the bitterness in his eyes. He was keeping score, noting who had arrived first, measuring who seemed most upset, calculating who had visited most often during his illness. "He will die in 3 weeks," Jesus said. and his voice broke. 3 weeks from the moment I'm showing you this vision. And he will die with his hands clutching this idol of family, this belief that his children owe him their lives, their time, their constant attention. He will die believing that he has been wronged, that he has been abandoned, that his sacrifice was wasted. The vision faded and Jesus turned to look at me directly. Tears were streaming down his face again, catching the moonlight, falling to the ground where they seemed to glow for a moment before being absorbed into the earth. Jonathan, do you understand what I'm saying? Do you understand the difference between loving your family and making an idol of your family? I thought about it, my mind racing. An idol it's anything we put before you, anything we look to for our identity, our worth, our security instead of finding those things in you. Yes, he said, nodding. Yes. And so many of my seniors have made an idol of their families. They have built their entire sense of purpose around being needed by their children and grandchildren, and now in their final years when their children have their own lives, their own families, their own responsibilities, they feel abandoned, betrayed, worthless. He began to pace around the clearing, and I noticed that wherever his feet touched the ground, the frost melted and small flowers began to push up through the earth, tiny white blossoms that glowed in the moonlight. It was January, the dead of winter, but life was springing up in his footsteps. They don't understand, he continued, that I never intended for their children to be their source of fulfillment. I never intended for their grandchildren to be their reason for living. I intended for me to be those things. I intended for their relationship with me to be so rich, so deep, so satisfying that their family relationships would be a blessing, yes, but not a necessity, not an idol. Another vision appeared, and this time I saw an elderly woman, she had to be in her 80s, sitting alone in an apartment. The walls were covered with children's artwork, photographs, handmade cards. She was crying as she looked at her phone, scrolling through social media, seeing pictures of her grandchildren at events she hadn't been invited to, family gatherings she hadn't been included in. Her name is Margaret, Jesus said. She's 84 years old. She has 3 children and 7 grandchildren, and she is consumed with bitterness because her children have set boundaries with her. They've asked her not to drop by unannounced. They've asked her not to criticize their parenting. They've asked her to respect their decisions about how they raise their children, and she has interpreted every boundary as rejection, every request for space as abandonment. I watched as the vision showed me Margaret's interactions with her family, the passive-aggressive comments, the guilt trips, the manipulation disguised as love. I saw her children trying to maintain relationships with her while also protecting their own families, and I saw how exhausting it was for them. She tells herself she's the victim, Jesus said. She tells herself that she's being punished for loving too much. But the truth is, she's not loving at all. She's demanding. She's controlling. She's trying to force her family to fill a void that only I can fill, and it's destroying her relationships and poisoning her final years. The vision shifted again, and I saw Margaret on her deathbed. Her children were there, but there was a distance, a guardedness in their expressions. They were dutiful, but not close. Present, but not intimate, and I could see the regret in Margaret's eyes, the realization, too late, that her demands had pushed away the very people she'd been trying to hold close. She has 2 years left, Jesus said quietly, 2 years to release this idol, 2 years to stop demanding that her family fill the void only I can fill, 2 years to learn to find her identity, her worth, her purpose in me instead of in how much her children need her. The vision faded, and Jesus stopped pacing. He stood in the center of the clearing, surrounded by the small white flowers that had sprung up in his footsteps, and he looked at me with such intensity that I felt like he was looking through me, into the deepest parts of my soul. "This is what I need you to tell my seniors," he said. "Your family is not your God. Your children are not your Savior. Your grandchildren are not your purpose. I am. I am your God. I am your Savior. I am your purpose. And if you go to your grave clutching the idol of family, demanding that they fulfill you, resenting them for having their own lives, you will enter eternity with a poverty of soul that will take ages to heal." The wind began to pick up again, gentler this time, and I could smell something in the air, something like spring flowers, completely out of place in the January cold. The clouds that had been passing across the moon cleared away, and suddenly the clearing was flooded with silver light so bright I had to squint. "But Lord," I said, finding my voice, "what about the commandment to honor father and mother? What about the biblical teaching on family? Aren't children supposed to care for their aging parents? Jesus smiled, but it was a sad smile. Yes, children are called to honor their parents. They are called to care for them in their old age. But Jonathan, honor is not the same as worship. Care is not the same as making someone the center of your universe. And parents are not entitled to demand that their children sacrifice their own families, their own callings, their own lives on the altar of parental expectation. He moved closer to me again, and I could feel the warmth radiating from him, pushing back the cold of the night. Around us, the ancient oaks seemed to lean in closer, their branches forming a tighter canopy overhead, as if they were trying to hear every word. There's a difference, he continued, between a parent who loves their children and blesses them to live their own lives, and a parent who demands that their children exist to meet the parent's emotional needs. There's a difference between a grandparent who delights in their grandchildren when they see them and a grandparent who resents their grandchildren's parents for not providing enough access. There's a difference between healthy family relationships and idolatry. I thought about my own life, my own relationships, and I felt a stab of conviction. Lord, how do we know? How do we know if we've made an idol of family? He knelt down beside me again, and he placed his hand over my heart. I could feel the warmth of his palm through my jacket, through my shirt, as if he was touching my actual heart, not just my chest. Ask yourself these questions, he said. Does your sense of worth depend on how much your family needs you? Does your emotional stability rise and fall based on how often they contact you? Do you feel angry or resentful when they make choices that don't include you? Do you use guilt to manipulate them into spending time with you? Do you criticize their decisions as a way of maintaining control? Do you compare how much they do for you versus how much you did for them? Do you keep score? Each question hit me like a hammer blow, and I could see how easy it would be to fall into these patterns, especially in the senior years when so much else has been stripped away: career, physical strength, independence. If you answered yes to any of those questions, Jesus continued, then you've made an idol of family, and that idol will follow you into eternity if you don't release it before you die. He removed his hand from my chest and stood up. The flowers that had sprung up around the clearing were growing taller now, their white blossoms opening wider, releasing that spring-like fragrance into the winter air. It was impossible, miraculous, and yet completely real. I want to show you one more thing, Jesus said, one more vision before this night ends. The air shimmered again, and I saw an elderly man, maybe late 70s, sitting in a rocking chair on a porch. He was alone, but he was smiling. He had a Bible open on his lap, and he was reading, his lips moving slightly as he absorbed the words. I could see a peace on his face, a contentment that was palpable even through the vision. His name is Thomas, Jesus said, and his voice was warm now, filled with something like pride. He's 79 years old, he has 5 children and 14 grandchildren, and he loves them deeply. But his identity is not in them. His worth is not determined by them. His purpose is not defined by them. I watched as the vision showed me Thomas's life. I saw him with his family, laughing with his grandchildren, offering wisdom to his children when they asked for it, being present at family gatherings. But I also saw him alone, and he was just as content, just as peaceful. I saw him in prayer, in worship, in deep communion with Jesus. I saw him serving at his church, mentoring younger men, using his final years to pour into others without demanding anything in return. He released the idol of family 20 years ago, Jesus explained. It was hard. It required him to grieve the expectations he'd had, to surrender his demands, to find his fulfillment in me instead of in how much his children needed him. But he did it. And now in his final years, his relationships with his family are richer than ever because they're free. His children don't feel obligated or manipulated. His grandchildren don't feel pressured. They come to him because they want to, not because they have to. And he blesses them and releases them over and over again. The vision shifted one last time, and I saw Thomas on his deathbed. His family was gathered around him, and the love in that room was tangible. There was grief, yes, but there was also peace. Thomas was smiling, his hand reaching up to touch his daughter's face, his eyes clear and bright despite his failing body. He will die in 6 months, Jesus said softly, and he will die with his hands open, not clutching, not demanding, not resenting. He will die having released the idol of family, and he will enter into eternity with a capacity for joy and intimacy that those who die clutching their idols will not experience for a very long time. The vision faded and the clearing returned to normal, or as normal as it could be, with Jesus standing in the center of it, surrounded by impossible flowers blooming in January. "This is the second thing I'm warning my seniors to release," he said. "The idol of family. Not family itself. Family is a gift, a blessing, something to be cherished. But the idol of family, the demand that family fulfill you, complete you, give you purpose and worth, that must be released. That must be surrendered. That must be laid at my feet before you die." He looked up at the sky, and I followed his gaze. The moon was beginning to set, and the first hints of dawn were touching the eastern horizon, turning the sky from black to deep blue. "Your time is short," he said, turning back to me. "Not just yours, Jonathan, but the time of everyone who will watch this video. Some of them have months, some have weeks, some have only days, and I am pleading with them, begging them to release this idol before it's too late." I felt tears streaming down my face. Lord, how? How do they release it? It's so deeply ingrained, especially for people who have spent decades building their identity around being a parent, a grandparent. "They cry out to me," he said simply. "They confess it as idolatry. They ask me to fill the void they've been demanding their family fill. They make the choice daily to find their worth in me instead of in how much their family needs them. They practice blessing and releasing instead of demanding and controlling. They learn to hold their family with open hands instead of clenched fists." The flowers around the clearing were beginning to fade now, wilting and returning to the earth as quickly as they'd sprung up. The warmth was dissipating, and I could feel the January cold creeping back in. "Tomorrow night," Jesus said, and I could hear the exhaustion in his voice, as if these encounters were costing him something. "Tomorrow night I will show you the third thing, the third anchor that must be released, but tonight you must go and deliver this message. You must warn my people about the idol of family." "They're going to be angry," I said, "even angrier than they were about unforgiveness. They're going to say I'm telling them not to love their families, that I'm being unbiblical." "I know," he interrupted gently. "They said the same things about me when I walked the earth. Who is my mother? Who are my brothers? Those who do the will of my Father. They didn't understand then, and many don't understand now. But you must deliver the message anyway, because lives, eternal experiences, hang in the balance." He began to fade, just as he had the night before, becoming translucent, like morning mist burning away in sunlight. But before he disappeared completely, he spoke one more time. "Tell them," he said, his voice growing distant, "that releasing the idol of family doesn't mean loving their family less. It means loving them better. It means loving them freely, without demand, without manipulation, without making them responsible for filling a void only I can fill. Tell them that." And then he was gone. The cold rushed back in, and I was alone in the clearing. The flowers had completely disappeared, leaving no trace they'd ever existed, except for the lingering scent of spring in the winter air. The ancient oaks stood silent around me, their branches still, their presence somehow comforting after the intensity of what I'd just experienced. I stayed there for a long time, sitting on the frozen ground, trying to process everything I'd seen and heard. The sky continued to lighten, and I could hear birds beginning to wake up, their morning songs echoing through the forest. By the time I finally stood up and made my way back down the trail to my car, the sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. When I got home, I knew what I had to do. I knew the message would be controversial. I knew people would be upset, but I also knew that somewhere out there was a senior who had made an idol of their family, who was dying inside because their children weren't meeting their expectations, who was poisoning their final years with resentment and bitterness. And that person needed to hear this message. That person needed to know that there was another way. So I'm telling you now, if you're watching this video, if you're a senior who has built your entire identity around being needed by your family, if you feel angry or resentful when your children or grandchildren don't prioritize you the way you think they should, if you use guilt or manipulation to control your family's time and attention, you have made an idol of family, and Jesus is asking you to release it. Not because he wants you to love your family less, but because he wants you to love them better. He wants you to love them freely. He wants you to find your identity, your worth, your purpose in him, so that your family relationships can be what they were always meant to be, a blessing, not a burden, a gift, not a demand. I need you to do something right now. I need you to pause this video and pray. Ask Jesus to show you if you've made an idol of family. Ask him to reveal the ways you've been demanding that your family fill a void only he can fill, and then ask him to help you release it. Ask him to teach you how to hold your family with open hands instead of clenched fists. And then I need you to come back tomorrow night, because what Jesus showed me on the third night, the third thing he's warning seniors to release before death, it's going to shake you to your core. It's going to challenge everything you think you know about faith and legacy and what really matters in the end. Drop a comment right now. Tell me if this message is hitting home. Tell me if you've made an idol of family. Tell me if you're willing to release it. Because I need to know you're not just watching. I need to know you're engaging, you're wrestling with this, you're taking it seriously. Share this video with every senior you know. Share it with every parent, every grandparent who might be struggling with this. Time is short. The message is urgent, and not everyone who needs to hear this will get the chance. You've been marked, you've been chosen, and tomorrow night, the third revelation awaits. I approached the forest clearing at 2:47 a.m. on January 3rd, 2026, and I could feel the spiritual atmosphere before I even reached the trailhead. The air was electric, charged with something I can't adequately describe, like the moment before lightning strikes, when every hair on your body stands on end and you know something massive is about to happen. The temperature had dropped even further, down to 19 degrees, and a storm was building. I could see it in the way the clouds were racing across the sky, backlit by the moon, moving faster than any natural wind should push them. The comments on the second video had been even more intense than the first, hundreds of seniors confessing their idolatry of family, weeping as they recognized themselves in the visions Jesus had shown me. But also hundreds of angry responses, people accusing me of telling them to abandon their families, of being unbiblical, of leading people astray. Some of the most vicious comments came from people who claimed to be devoted Christians, people who couldn't see that their defensiveness was itself evidence of the idol Jesus was asking them to release. I'd barely slept in the past 48 hours. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Jesus' face, saw his tears, heard his voice pleading with his people to release what was holding them back from the fullness of eternity. The weight of the message was crushing me, and I knew with absolute certainty, that tonight would be even more intense than the previous 2 nights. The forest was alive with sound as I walked the trail. The wind was already strong, whipping through the trees, creating a symphony of creaks and groans and rustling leaves. Branches scraped against each other overhead, and I could hear the distant rumble of thunder, though the storm was still miles away. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, catching swirling leaves and debris being tossed by the wind. When I reached the clearing, I stopped at its edge and just stared. The ancient oaks were swaying violently, their massive trunks bending in ways that seemed impossible for trees so old and thick. The clouds above were churning, moving in circular patterns, and the moon kept appearing and disappearing behind them, creating a strobe effect that made the whole scene feel surreal, apocalyptic. I stepped into the center of the clearing and turned off my flashlight. The wind immediately hit me with full force, nearly knocking me off my feet. My jacket whipped around me, and I had to lean into the wind just to stay upright. The temperature was dropping by the second, and I could see my breath being torn away by the gale before it could even form into clouds. And then, in an instant, everything stopped. The wind died, the clouds froze in place, the thunder ceased. Even the creaking of the trees fell silent. It was as if someone had pressed pause on the entire world, and I was standing in a bubble of absolute stillness in the center of that clearing. Jesus appeared, and this time he didn't fade in gradually or materialize slowly. He was simply there, standing 10 feet in front of me, and the power radiating from him was so intense that I collapsed to the ground, not kneeling but prostrate, my face pressed against the frozen earth. I couldn't have stood if I'd wanted to. The weight of his presence was too much. Jonathan. His voice rolled across the clearing like thunder, and I felt it in my bones, in my teeth, in the marrow of my being. Rise, look at me, you must see this, you must witness what I'm about to show you. I struggled to my knees, then to my feet, my legs shaking so badly I could barely stand. When I finally looked at his face, I gasped. He wasn't weeping tonight. His eyes were blazing with something that was part grief, part righteous anger, part desperate love. His face was set with a determination I hadn't seen in the previous encounters. Tonight, he said, and his voice was different, harder, more urgent. I show you the third thing. And this one, Jonathan, this one is the most dangerous. This one is the most insidious. This one is destroying my seniors from the inside out, and they don't even know it's happening. The air around us began to shimmer, and I braced myself for another vision. But this time, instead of showing me individual people, Jesus showed me something else. The clearing itself seemed to transform, and suddenly I was standing in what looked like a massive warehouse, stretching as far as I could see in every direction, and it was filled, absolutely packed, with stuff, furniture, clothing, jewelry, collections of every kind imaginable, china sets, crystal, silver, antiques, photographs, heirlooms, knickknacks, decorations, books, records, tools, equipment, cars, boats, RVs, the accumulation of entire lifetimes, stacked and stored and organized and preserved. The third thing, Jesus said, his voice echoing through the warehouse vision, is the idol of possessions, the worship of stuff, the belief that what you own defines who you are, that what you leave behind determines your legacy, that your treasures on earth have any value whatsoever in eternity. He gestured, and the vision zoomed in on a section of the warehouse. I saw an elderly woman, she had to be in her late 80s, standing in a house so full of possessions that there were narrow pathways between stacks of boxes and furniture and collections. She was dusting a shelf of figurines, each one carefully placed, each one part of a collection she'd been building for 60 years. Her name is Dorothy, Jesus said, and his voice was heavy with sorrow. She's 87 years old. She has spent the last 40 years of her life accumulating, organizing, preserving, and protecting her possessions. She has collections of everything: figurines, dolls, dishes, linens, jewelry, furniture. She has 3 storage units in addition to her house, all of them packed with things she never uses, never looks at, but can't bear to part with. I watched as the vision showed me Dorothy's daily life, hours spent cleaning and organizing her possessions, hours spent shopping for more things to add to her collections, hours spent worrying about what would happen to all of it when she died. She had notebooks full of instructions for her children about which items were valuable, which should be kept in the family, which should be sold, and for how much. She prays, Jesus continued, but half of her prayers are about her possessions, asking me to protect them from theft, from damage, from loss. She reads her Bible, but she skips over every passage about storing up treasures in heaven because those verses make her uncomfortable. She goes to church, but she's constantly comparing what others have to what she has, feeling superior when she has more, feeling envious when someone has something she wants. The vision shifted, and I saw Dorothy's children, 3 middle-aged adults who looked exhausted and frustrated. They were trying to talk to their mother about downsizing, about moving to a smaller place, about getting rid of some of her possessions, but she was becoming agitated, angry, accusing them of trying to steal from her, of not appreciating the value of what she'd accumulated. Her children have given up, Jesus said quietly. They've stopped trying to help her because every conversation ends in conflict. They've stopped visiting as often because her house is so full of stuff that there's barely room to sit down. They're dreading the day she dies because they know they'll be left with the overwhelming task of dealing with decades of accumulation. The vision fast-forwarded, and I saw Dorothy in a hospital bed, her breathing labored, her time clearly short. But even in her final moments, she was worried about her possessions, asking her children to promise they wouldn't throw anything away, making them swear they'd keep the collections together, using her last breaths to give instructions about stuff instead of blessing her children, instead of speaking words of love, instead of preparing her soul for eternity. She will die in 2 weeks, Jesus said, and his voice cracked with emotion. 2 weeks from this moment, and she will die with her hands clutching the idol of possessions, believing that what she owned mattered, that what she accumulated had value, that her legacy is measured in things. The vision shifted again, and I saw Dorothy's spirit leaving her body. I saw her standing before Jesus, and the look on her face was one of horror and shame as she realized, too late, that everything she'd spent decades accumulating, protecting, and worrying about had been left behind. All of it, every single item, and none of it, not one figurine, not one piece of jewelry, not one carefully preserved heirloom, had any value in eternity. She is mine, Jesus said firmly. Her salvation is secure, but Jonathan, the poverty of her soul, the emptiness. She spent 40 years investing in things that turned to dust the moment she died. She could have been investing in eternal treasures, relationships, service, generosity, spiritual growth. But instead, she invested in stuff. And now, in eternity, she is poor. So desperately poor. The warehouse vision faded, and we were back in the clearing. The storm that had been frozen in place suddenly resumed, but it was more intense now. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the ancient oaks in stark white light. Thunder crashed so loud it felt like the earth was splitting open. Rain began to fall, not a gentle rain, but a deluge, sheets of water pouring from the sky. But in the center of the clearing where Jesus and I stood, it was completely dry. The rain fell all around us, creating a wall of water, but not a single drop touched us. We stood in a cylinder of calm while the storm raged. "Do you understand what I'm showing you?" Jesus asked, and he had to raise his voice to be heard over the thunder. "Do you understand how many of my seniors are enslaved to their possessions? How many are spending their final years worrying about stuff instead of preparing their souls for eternity?" I nodded, unable to speak, overwhelmed by what I was seeing and hearing. "Let me show you more," he said, and another vision appeared overlaid on the storm around us. This time I saw an elderly man, maybe mid-70s, standing in a garage full of tools and equipment. He had every tool imaginable, many of them duplicates, most of them barely used. He was organizing them, rearranging them, admiring them. His wife was calling him from inside the house, asking him to spend time with her, but he waved her off. He had to finish organizing his tools. "His name is Richard," Jesus said. "He's 74 years old. He has spent his entire retirement accumulating tools, equipment, and vehicles. He has 3 cars he never drives. He has tools he's never used. He has equipment for hobbies he's never pursued. He tells himself he's going to use it all someday, that he's going to start that woodworking project, that he's going to restore that classic car, that he's going to build that workshop." The vision showed me Richard's life, the hours spent shopping for tools, the hours spent organizing his garage, the hours spent watching videos about equipment he wanted to buy. His wife was lonely, sitting in the house by herself while he was in the garage with his possessions. His grandchildren came to visit, but he was distracted, more interested in showing them his tool collection than in actually connecting with them. "He has 1 year left," Jesus said, "1 year before a heart attack takes him, and he will die having never used most of what he accumulated. He will die having spent his final years investing in stuff instead of relationships. He will die with a garage full of tools and a heart empty of the things that actually matter." The vision shifted and I saw Richard's funeral. His family was there, grieving but also frustrated. His wife was overwhelmed by the task of dealing with all his possessions. His children were arguing about what to do with it all. His grandchildren barely remembered him because he'd been too busy with his stuff to really invest in them. "This is what the idol of possessions does," Jesus said, and his voice was filled with righteous anger now. "It steals time, it steals relationships, it steals focus, it steals the final precious years that could be spent preparing for eternity, investing in what actually matters, leaving a legacy of love instead of a legacy of stuff." The rain around us intensified, and the lightning was almost constant now, turning the night into day every few seconds. The thunder was so loud I could feel it in my chest, and the ancient oaks were bending almost to the breaking point under the force of the wind. "But it's not just about accumulation," Jesus continued, and another vision appeared. "It's also about control, about using possessions as a way to manipulate, to maintain power, to keep people dependent." This time I saw an elderly woman, early 80s, sitting in a living room full of expensive furniture and artwork. She was talking to her daughter, and I could hear the conversation clearly. "If you want to inherit this house," the woman was saying, "you need to visit me more often. You need to call me every day. You need to make me a priority." "Her name is Patricia," Jesus said. "She's 82 years old, and she uses her possessions as leverage to control her children. She dangles inheritance like a carrot, threatening to change her will whenever her children don't do what she wants. She uses her money and her possessions to manipulate, to demand attention, to punish those who don't comply with her wishes." The vision showed me the effect this had on Patricia's family. Her children were stressed, resentful, walking on eggshells around her. They visited out of obligation, not love. They called out of fear of being written out of the will, not because they wanted to connect. The possessions that Patricia thought were giving her power were actually destroying her relationships. "She has 6 months left," Jesus said, 6 months before cancer takes her. "And she will die having used her possessions as weapons instead of blessings. She will die with money in the bank and poverty in her soul. She will die having pushed away the people she loved because she loved her stuff more." The vision faded, and Jesus turned to face me fully. The storm was still raging around us, but his face was calm, determined, filled with an intensity that was almost frightening. "This is what I need you to tell my seniors," he said, and his voice cut through the thunder like a sword. Your possessions are worthless in eternity. Every single thing you own, every item you've accumulated, every treasure you've stored up on earth, it all turns to dust the moment you die. And if you've spent your final years worrying about stuff, accumulating stuff, organizing stuff, protecting stuff, using stuff to control people, you will enter eternity with a poverty of soul that will take ages to heal. He raised his hands, and the rain around us began to glow, each drop catching the lightning and reflecting it back, creating a curtain of liquid light surrounding us. I told them when I walked the earth, he continued, his voice rising, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven. But they didn't listen then, and they're not listening now. They're spending their final years accumulating more stuff, worrying about more stuff, fighting over stuff, using stuff to manipulate and control. Another vision appeared, and this time it was different. I saw an elderly man, late 70s, standing in a nearly empty apartment. He had a bed, a chair, a small table, a few books. That was it. But his face was peaceful, joyful even. He was praying, and I could hear his words. Thank you, Lord, for freeing me from the burden of possessions. Thank you for teaching me that I don't need stuff to be happy, to be fulfilled, to have purpose. Thank you for showing me that the only treasure worth having is you. His name is David, Jesus said, and his voice was warm now, filled with pride and love. He's 78 years old. 20 years ago, he was like Dorothy, like Richard, like Patricia. His house was full of possessions. His garage was packed with stuff. His storage units were overflowing, and he was miserable, enslaved to it all, spending all his time and energy maintaining and protecting and worrying about his stuff. The vision showed me David's transformation. I saw him reading the Gospels and being convicted by Jesus' words about possessions. I saw him beginning to give things away, not just getting rid of junk, but giving away valuable items, expensive items, things he'd spent years accumulating. I saw the freedom that came with each item he released, the lightness, the joy. He spent 5 years downsizing, Jesus explained. It was hard, it was painful. He had to grieve the idol of possessions, had to confront the lie that his stuff defined him, that his accumulations gave him worth, but he did it. He released it all, and now, in his final years, he is free, free to focus on what actually matters, free to invest in relationships, free to serve, free to prepare his soul for eternity. The vision shifted, and I saw David on his deathbed. His small apartment was full of people, children, grandchildren, friends, people he'd mentored and served. They were gathered around him, and the love in that room was palpable. David was smiling, his hands open, blessing each person, speaking words of love and wisdom, completely at peace. He will die in 4 months, Jesus said softly, and he will die with his hands open, not clutching, not worrying about stuff, not trying to control people with possessions. He will die having invested in eternal treasures, relationships, service, generosity, spiritual growth, and he will enter eternity rich, so incredibly rich. The vision faded, and the storm around us began to subside. The rain slowed to a drizzle, then stopped completely. The thunder grew distant. The lightning became less frequent. The wind died down to a gentle breeze. And as the storm cleared, I could see the first hints of dawn touching the eastern horizon. Jesus looked exhausted, as if the encounter had drained him. He sat down on the ground in the center of the clearing, and I sat down across from him, our knees almost touching. Jonathan, he said quietly, do you understand the urgency of this message? Do you understand how many of my seniors are enslaved to possessions? How many are spending their final years accumulating, organizing, protecting, worrying about stuff that has no eternal value? I nodded, tears streaming down my face. Yes, Lord, I understand. They think they're being responsible, he continued. They think they're preserving family heirlooms, maintaining their legacy, being good stewards, but they're not. They're worshiping idols. They're serving stuff instead of serving me, and it's destroying them. He reached out and placed his hand on my shoulder, and I could feel the warmth, the love, the desperate urgency in his touch. Tell them, he said, his voice intense. Tell them to release the idol of possessions. Tell them to give it away, to downsize, to simplify, to free themselves from the burden of stuff. Not because possessions are evil, they're not, but because possessions can so easily become idols, and idols will follow them into eternity if they don't release them before they die. The sun was rising now, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. The ancient oaks were still, their branches no longer swaying, their trunks solid and unmoved. The clearing looked peaceful, beautiful, as if the storm had never happened. "There are two more things," Jesus said, standing up. "Two more anchors that must be released. Tomorrow night I will show you the fourth. But today you must deliver this message. You must warn my people about the idol of possessions." "They're going to say I'm telling them to be irresponsible," I said. "They're going to say that it's wise to have possessions, that there's nothing wrong with accumulating things." "And they're right," he interrupted. "There's nothing inherently wrong with possessions. But there's everything wrong with possessions that possess you. There's everything wrong with stuff that steals your time, your focus, your relationships, your spiritual growth. There's everything wrong with accumulations that you worship, that you serve, that you use to control others." He began to fade, the morning light seeming to absorb him, making him translucent. "Tell them," he said, his voice growing distant, "that they can't take it with them. Tell them that every single thing they own will be left behind when they die. Tell them that the only treasures worth having are the ones they store up in heaven. Relationships, service, generosity, spiritual growth. Tell them that." And then he was gone. I sat there in the clearing as the sun rose, watching the light filter through the branches of the ancient oaks, listening to the birds singing their morning songs, feeling the weight of the message I'd been given. Around me, the forest was waking up, squirrels chattering, leaves rustling, life returning to normal after the supernatural encounter. But I knew nothing would ever be normal again. I knew that what Jesus had shown me over these 3 nights was going to change lives, was going to challenge everything people believed about aging, about death, about what really matters in the end. I finally stood up and made my way back down the trail to my car. The sun was fully up now, and the forest looked completely different in daylight. Peaceful, ordinary, beautiful. But I knew what had happened here. I knew what I'd witnessed, and I knew I had to share it, no matter the cost. When I got home, I sat down to record this message, and I'm telling you now, if you're a senior who has spent years accumulating possessions, if your house is full of stuff you never use, if you have storage units packed with things you never look at, if you're spending your final years worrying about stuff instead of preparing for eternity, you have made an idol of possessions. And Jesus is asking you to release it, not because he wants you to be irresponsible, not because possessions are evil, but because he wants you to be free. He wants you to spend your final years investing in what actually matters. He wants you to enter eternity rich in the things that have eternal value: relationships, service, generosity, spiritual growth. I need you to do something right now. I need you to look around your house, your garage, your storage units. I need you to ask yourself honestly, am I enslaved to my possessions? Am I spending more time maintaining stuff than investing in relationships? Am I using possessions to control people? Am I worrying more about what will happen to my stuff when I die than about the condition of my soul? And if the answer to any of those questions is yes, I need you to pray right now. Ask Jesus to free you from the idol of possessions. Ask him to show you what to release, what to give away, what to simplify. Ask him to help you invest in eternal treasures instead of earthly stuff. And then I need you to come back tomorrow night. Because what Jesus showed me on the 4th night, the 4th thing he's warning seniors to release before death, it's going to cut to the very core of who you are. It's going to expose an idol that almost no one wants to admit they're carrying. Drop a comment right now. Tell me if you are enslaved to possessions. Tell me if you're ready to release this idol. Tell me what you're going to give away, what you're going to simplify, what you're going to let go of, because I need to know you're not just watching. I need to know you're taking action. Share this video with every senior you know who's drowning in possessions, who's enslaved to stuff, who's spending their final years accumulating instead of preparing for eternity. Time is short. The deadline is approaching, and not everyone who needs to hear this will get the chance. You've been marked. You've been chosen. And tomorrow night, the 4th revelation awaits. The storm is building. The message is intensifying. And what comes next will shake you to your very foundation. I'm sitting here now, 3 days after that final encounter in the forest clearing, and my hands are still shaking as I try to find the words to tell you what happened on the 4th and 5th nights. Yes, there was a 5th night. Jesus had more to show me than even he initially revealed. But before I get to those final 2 encounters, before I share the 4th and 5th things that seniors must release before death, I need to tell you what happened when I returned to that clearing in the daylight. It was January 6th, 2026, around 2 in the afternoon. The sun was shining, the temperature had risen to an almost pleasant 45 degrees, and I felt compelled, no, driven, to go back to that sacred space where Jesus had met me 4 nights in a row. I needed to see it in the light of day. I needed to confirm that what I'd experienced was real, that I hadn't imagined it all, that the weight I was carrying wasn't the result of sleep deprivation or spiritual delusion. The hike up the trail felt different in daylight. Families were out walking, joggers passed me on the path, dogs barked in the distance. Everything was so normal, so ordinary, and yet I was carrying the weight of revelations that felt like they could crush me if I let them. When I reached the clearing, I stopped at its edge and just stared. The ancient oaks stood exactly as they always had, massive, weathered, their branches reaching toward the sky. The clearing was empty, peaceful, with patches of winter grass and fallen leaves covering the ground. There was no evidence of the storms, no sign of the supernatural encounters, no trace of the impossible flowers that had bloomed in Jesus' footsteps. But I could feel it, the holiness of the place, the weight of what had happened there. And as I stood at the edge of that clearing, I began to weep. Not gentle tears, but deep body-shaking sobs that came from a place so deep inside me I didn't even know it existed. Because I realized something in that moment. I realized that every single thing Jesus had warned seniors to release, unforgiveness, the idol of family, the idol of possessions, these weren't just issues for seniors. These were issues for me, for everyone. The seniors were just running out of time to deal with them before stepping into eternity. I walked into the center of the clearing and knelt down on the same spot where I'd knelt before Jesus 4 nights in a row. The ground was cold, hard, real. And I prayed. I prayed for the strength to deliver the rest of the message. I prayed for the seniors who would watch these videos. I prayed for the courage to share what Jesus had shown me on those final 2 nights. And as I prayed, I heard his voice, not audibly like in the nighttime encounters, but in my spirit, clear and unmistakable. Tell them everything, Jonathan. Hold nothing back. The fourth thing, the fifth thing, the deadline, the consequences, the hope. Tell them everything. So that's what I'm going to do. Let me take you back to the fourth night, January 4th, 2026 at 2:47 a.m. I arrived at the clearing expecting another storm, another intense encounter, another devastating revelation. But when Jesus appeared that night, the atmosphere was different. The air was still, the temperature mild, the moon bright and clear. He was sitting on the ground in the center of the clearing, waiting for me, and when I approached, he patted the ground next to him, inviting me to sit. I sat down beside him, and for a long moment we just sat there in silence. I could hear the night sounds of the forest, an owl hooting, small animals rustling in the underbrush, the distant sound of wind in the trees. It was peaceful, almost comfortable, and that made what came next even more shocking. The fourth thing, Jesus said quietly, not looking at me but staring up at the stars visible through the canopy of oaks, is the idol of reputation, the worship of what others think, the belief that your image, your standing, your respectability matters more than truth, more than authenticity, more than the condition of your soul. He turned to look at me, and his eyes were sad but also penetrating, as if he was looking not just at me but through me, into the deepest parts of my heart. This one is the most hidden, he continued, the most socially acceptable, the most defended by religious people, because it disguises itself as righteousness, as propriety, as maintaining a good testimony. But it's an idol nonetheless, and it's destroying my seniors from the inside out. A vision appeared, but this time it was different. Instead of showing me strangers, Jesus showed me people I recognized, not by name, but by type. I saw an elderly man sitting in a church pew, dressed impeccably, his Bible worn and marked, his posture perfect. Everyone around him saw a pillar of the faith, a respected elder, a man of God. But Jesus showed me what was behind the image, the secret sins this man had never confessed because it would ruin his reputation, the doubts he'd never voiced because people expected him to have all the answers, the struggles he'd never shared because it would shatter the image of spiritual maturity he'd spent decades building, the relationships he'd sacrificed to maintain his standing in the church, the truth he'd suppressed to protect his reputation. His name is William, Jesus said. He's 81 years old. He's been a deacon in his church for 40 years. Everyone respects him. Everyone looks up to him. Everyone thinks he has it all together. But he's dying inside, crushed under the weight of maintaining an image that isn't real. He has 8 months left to live, and he's going to die having never let anyone see the real him, having never been truly known, having never experienced the freedom that comes from authenticity. The vision shifted, and I saw William on his deathbed, surrounded by people from his church. They were praising his faithfulness, his consistency, his example. But I could see the loneliness in his eyes, the isolation, the desperate wish that just once someone had known the real him, the struggling, doubting, broken man behind the respectable image. "He will die with the idol of reputation intact," Jesus said, his voice heavy with sorrow. "And he will enter eternity, having never experienced the intimacy that comes from being fully known and fully loved. He will enter eternity having spent his final years performing instead of being, maintaining an image instead of pursuing truth, protecting his reputation instead of preparing his soul." Another vision appeared, and this time I saw an elderly woman, mid-70s, sitting in a living room with her adult children. They were trying to have a difficult conversation with her, trying to address some hurt from the past, trying to bring healing to their family. But she kept shutting them down, denying, deflecting, refusing to acknowledge any wrongdoing, because it would damage her image as the perfect mother, the perfect Christian, the perfect matriarch. "Her name is Barbara," Jesus said. "She's 76 years old. She has spent her entire life cultivating an image of perfection, the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the perfect Christian woman. But that image has required her to deny reality, to rewrite history, to gaslight her own children when they try to address legitimate hurts. She cannot admit fault because it would shatter the reputation she's built. She cannot acknowledge mistakes because it would reveal that she's human, flawed, in need of grace." The vision showed me the effect this had on Barbara's family. Her children were frustrated, hurt, unable to have authentic relationships with her because she refused to be real. Her grandchildren barely knew her because every interaction was performative, carefully managed to maintain the image. She was surrounded by people, but completely alone because no one knew the real her. "She has 1 year left," Jesus said. 1 year before a stroke takes her. And she will die having never let down the mask, having never been authentic, having never experienced the freedom and intimacy that comes from being fully known. She will die protecting her reputation and losing her soul in the process. Jesus stood up and began to walk around the clearing, and I stood up to follow him. The moonlight was bright enough that I could see his face clearly, could see the tears that were starting to form in his eyes again. "Do you understand what I'm showing you?" he asked. "Do you understand how many of my seniors are enslaved to reputation? How many are spending their final years maintaining an image instead of pursuing authenticity? How many are protecting their standing instead of preparing their souls?" "But Lord," I said, struggling to understand, "aren't we supposed to maintain a good testimony? Aren't we supposed to be examples? Aren't we supposed to—" "There's a difference," he interrupted firmly, "between living with integrity and worshiping reputation. There's a difference between being an example and maintaining a false image. There's a difference between a good testimony and a carefully curated performance designed to make people think you're something you're not." He stopped walking and turned to face me directly. "Jonathan, I never asked my people to be perfect. I never asked them to have it all together. I never asked them to maintain an image of spiritual maturity that isn't real. I asked them to be authentic, to be honest, to be real about their struggles, their doubts, their failures, because it's in that authenticity, that vulnerability, that honesty that true intimacy with me and with others becomes possible." Another vision appeared, and this time I saw an elderly man, early 80s, sitting in a small group at his church, and he was being real. He was sharing his struggles with doubt, his questions about faith, his failures as a father, his regrets about his life, and instead of judgment, instead of rejection, he was receiving love, acceptance, grace. People were gathering around him, praying for him, thanking him for his honesty, sharing their own struggles in response to his vulnerability. "His name is James," Jesus said, and his voice was warm now, filled with pride. "He's 83 years old. For 70 years, he maintained a perfect image, the perfect Christian, the perfect husband, the perfect father. But 5 years ago, he broke. The weight of maintaining the image became too much, and he confessed everything, his doubts, his failures, his secret sins, his struggles. He thought it would destroy his reputation, that people would reject him, that he would lose his standing in the church. The vision showed me what happened instead. I saw James experiencing freedom for the first time in his life. I saw him developing deep, authentic relationships. I saw him being used by God in ways he never had been before because now he was real, now he was honest, now he was authentic. People were drawn to him not because he had it all together, but because he was willing to admit he didn't. "He has 6 months left," Jesus said softly. 6 months before cancer takes him, but he will die free. He will die having been fully known and fully loved. He will die having released the idol of reputation and discovered the joy of authenticity. And he will enter eternity rich in the things that actually matter: real relationships, genuine intimacy, authentic connection with me and with others. The vision faded, and Jesus and I were alone in the clearing again. He sat back down on the ground, and I sat beside him. "This is the fourth thing I'm warning my seniors to release," he said. "The idol of reputation, the worship of what others think, the belief that maintaining an image is more important than being real. Because if they die with this idol intact, they will enter eternity having never been fully known, having never experienced the intimacy that comes from authenticity, having spent their final years performing instead of being." He was quiet for a moment, and then he said something that shocked me. "There's one more thing, Jonathan, one more idol, the fifth and final thing that seniors must release before they die. And this one is the hardest of all. This one will make people the angriest. This one will be the most controversial, but it must be said." I waited, my heart pounding, knowing that whatever came next would be even more challenging than everything that had come before. "The fifth thing," Jesus said, his voice barely above a whisper, "is the idol of religion itself, the worship of church attendance, of Bible knowledge, of theological correctness, of religious activity. The belief that doing religious things is the same as knowing me, the belief that external performance can substitute for internal transformation, the belief that you can earn your way into deeper intimacy with me through religious achievement." He looked at me, and his eyes were blazing now. "This is the most dangerous idol of all because it's the one that religious people defend most fiercely. It's the one that looks the most righteous. It's the one that hides behind scripture and tradition and orthodoxy, but it's an idol nonetheless, and it keeps my people from actually knowing me." A vision appeared, and I saw an elderly woman, late 70s, sitting in a church service. She was there every time the doors were open. She knew her Bible backwards and forwards. She could quote theology, recite creeds, explain doctrine. Everyone in the church considered her a spiritual giant. But Jesus showed me her heart, and it was cold, hard, judgmental, critical. She knew about God, but she didn't know God. She had religion, but she didn't have relationship. She had information, but she didn't have transformation. She attended church, but she had never truly encountered me. "Her name is Ruth," Jesus said. "She's 79 years old. She's been in church her entire life. She's read through the Bible 40 times. She's attended thousands of services, hundreds of Bible studies, dozens of conferences. She can debate theology with the best of them. She can correct people's doctrine. She can quote scripture to support any position. But she doesn't know me. Not really, not intimately, not personally." The vision showed me Ruth's life, the religious activity, the Bible studies, the church attendance, the theological debates. But underneath it all was emptiness, a void, a desperate loneliness that all her religious activity couldn't fill. She had substituted knowing about God for knowing God, and the difference was devastating. "She has 4 months left," Jesus said. 4 months before her heart gives out. And she will die having spent her entire life doing religious things, but never actually encountering me. She will die with a head full of knowledge and a heart empty of intimacy. She will enter eternity and realize, too late, that all her religious activity was just another idol, another way of avoiding the vulnerability and surrender that true relationship with me requires. I was weeping now because I could see myself in this vision. I could see how easy it would be to substitute religious activity for actual relationship, to hide behind theology instead of pursuing intimacy, to perform instead of surrender. "But Lord," I managed to say through my tears, "how do we know the difference? How do we know if we're worshiping religion instead of worshiping you?" He placed his hand on my shoulder, and the warmth of his touch flooded through me. "Ask yourself these questions. Do you know me, or do you just know about me? Does your religious activity flow from intimacy with me, or is it a substitute for intimacy? Do you love me, or do you love the feeling of being a good Christian? Does your faith transform you, or does it just make you feel superior to others? Are you pursuing me, or are you pursuing the approval of religious people?" He removed his hand and stood up. The sky was beginning to lighten with the approach of dawn, and I knew our time was almost over. "There's one more vision I need to show you," he said. "One more example before this night ends. The final vision appeared, and I saw an elderly man, mid-80s, sitting alone in a simple room. He didn't have a Bible in his hands. He wasn't in a church. He wasn't doing anything that looked religious. He was just sitting there, and his face was radiant with joy, with peace, with a contentment that was palpable even through the vision. His name is Peter, Jesus said. He's 86 years old. For most of his life, he was like Ruth, all religious activity, all Bible knowledge, all theological correctness, but no real intimacy with me. But 10 years ago, everything changed. He had a health crisis that stripped away his ability to do all the religious things he'd been doing. He couldn't attend church regularly. He couldn't participate in Bible studies. He couldn't serve on committees. All his religious activity was taken away. The vision showed me Peter's transformation. I saw him in that hospital bed, facing his mortality, and finally crying out to Jesus not as a theological concept, but as a person. I saw the moment of true encounter, true intimacy, true relationship. I saw his face transform as he experienced Jesus, not as a doctrine to defend, but as a friend to know. He spent the next 10 years, Jesus continued, learning to simply be with me. Not doing religious things, but just being in my presence. Not accumulating Bible knowledge, but actually knowing me. Not performing for others, but surrendering to me. And now, in his final months, he has an intimacy with me that most people never experience in their entire lives. The vision showed me Peter on his deathbed, and the peace on his face was supernatural. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't anxious. He wasn't worried about whether he'd done enough, been good enough, been religious enough. He was simply resting in the relationship he'd cultivated over the past 10 years. He will die in 2 months, Jesus said softly, and he will die having released the idol of religion and discovered the joy of relationship. He will enter eternity already intimate with me, already knowing my voice, already comfortable in my presence. And the transition from this life to the next will be seamless because he's already been living in communion with me. The vision faded, and the sun was rising now, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. Jesus turned to face me one last time. "These are the 5 things," he said, "the 5 idols that seniors must release before they die. Unforgiveness, the idol of family, the idol of possessions, the idol of reputation, the idol of religion. Not everyone who hears this message will receive it. Not everyone who watches these videos will take action. But you, Jonathan, you've been marked to deliver this message, and those who have ears to hear, let them hear." He began to fade, but before he disappeared completely, he spoke one more time. "Tell them they have 30 days, he said, his voice urgent. 30 days from today, February 3rd, 2026, is the deadline. Not because I'm arbitrary, but because that's when a shift happens in the spiritual realm. That's when the window closes for many who are watching this. 30 days to release these idols, 30 days to prepare their souls, 30 days to invest in what actually matters. Tell them, Jonathan, tell them time is running out." And then he was gone. I sat there in that clearing as the sun rose, and I knew with absolute certainty that everything had changed, that I would never be the same, that the message I'd been given was more urgent, more important, more life-altering than anything I'd ever shared before. So here's what I need you to do. Here's your 30-day challenge, starting right now, today, this moment. Week 1, unforgiveness. Spend 30 minutes every single day this week identifying everyone you need to forgive. Write their names down, write what they did, and then one by one pray and ask Jesus to help you release them. You don't have to feel like forgiving. You just have to be willing to be made willing. Cry out to him. Ask him to do in you what you cannot do yourself. Week 2, the idol of family. Spend 30 minutes every day this week examining your relationship with your family. Are you demanding that they fulfill you? Are you using guilt to manipulate them? Are you keeping score? Are you making them responsible for your emotional well-being? Confess it as idolatry. Ask Jesus to fill the void you've been demanding your family fill. Practice blessing and releasing instead of demanding and controlling. Week 3, the idol of possessions. Spend 30 minutes every day this week going through your possessions, not just organizing them, releasing them. Give things away, donate, simplify. Ask Jesus to show you what you're clutching, what you're enslaved to, what you're using to control others, and then let it go. Practice holding everything with open hands. Week 4, the idols of reputation and religion. This is the hardest week. Spend 30 minutes every day examining your heart. Are you maintaining an image that isn't real? Are you protecting a reputation at the cost of authenticity? Are you substituting religious activity for actual intimacy with Jesus? Confess it. Be honest with someone about your struggles. Stop performing and start being real. Stop doing religious things and start actually pursuing Jesus. Here's what I need you to understand. This isn't about earning your salvation. If you're in Christ, your salvation is secure. This is about preparing your soul for eternity. This is about releasing the anchors that will limit your capacity for joy, for intimacy, for experiencing the fullness of what Jesus has prepared for you. The deadline is February 3rd, 2026. That's 30 days from when Jesus gave me this message. I don't know why that date. I don't know what happens after that date. I just know that he was urgent about it, that he was pleading with me to make sure people understood the time sensitivity. Some of you watching this don't have 30 days. Some of you have weeks. Some have only days. And Jesus is begging you to use whatever time you have left to release these idols, to prepare your soul, to invest in what actually matters. I need you to do something right now. I need you to comment below and tell me which of these 5 idols you're struggling with. Be honest. Be real. Stop performing. Stop protecting your image. Just be authentic about where you are and what you need to release. And then I need you to share this video, all 4 parts, with every senior you know, with your parents, your grandparents, your elderly friends, your church members, anyone who's in their final years and needs to hear this message. Because time is running out, and not everyone who needs to hear this will get the chance. I went back to that clearing yesterday, and I stood in the center where Jesus had appeared to me 5 times, and I prayed. I prayed for everyone who would watch these videos. I prayed for the seniors who are carrying these idols. I prayed for the courage to deliver this message, even though I know it will be controversial, even though I know some people will be angry, even though I know I'll be criticized and attacked. But I also prayed with hope, because I know that somewhere out there, someone is watching this video who desperately needs to hear this message, someone who's been enslaved to unforgiveness for decades, someone who's made an idol of their family, someone who's drowning in possessions, someone who's exhausted from maintaining a false image, someone who's been doing religious things but never actually knowing Jesus. And that person, maybe it's you, is going to take this message seriously. You're going to spend the next 30 days releasing these idols. You're going to prepare your soul for eternity. You're going to invest in what actually matters. And when you step from this life into the next, you're going to enter into the fullness of joy, the depths of intimacy, the heights of glory that Jesus has prepared for those who love him. The ancient oaks in that clearing have stood for centuries. They've weathered storms, droughts, fires. They've released their leaves every autumn, trusting that new growth will come in spring. They don't cling to what must fall away. You must learn this wisdom. You must release what Jesus is asking you to release. You must let go of the idols that are holding you back from the fullness of eternity. Your time is short. The deadline is approaching. The message has been delivered. What you do with it will echo into eternity. You've been marked, you've been chosen, you've been warned. Now the choice is yours. Will you release these 5 things before you die? Will you prepare your soul for eternity? Will you invest in what actually matters? Or will you cling to your idols and enter eternity with a poverty of soul that will take ages to heal? The clock is ticking. 30 days. February 3rd, 2026. Don't waste another moment. Drop your comment now. Share this video now. Start the 30-day challenge now, because tomorrow is not guaranteed, and Jesus is waiting for you to release what's holding you back, waiting for you to prepare your soul, waiting for you to come home free. The forest clearing is empty now. The encounters are over. The message has been delivered. But the work, your work, is just beginning. Go. Release. Prepare. Invest. Your eternity depends on it.